Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I can see this is a lively bunch, and I'd like to make this a little interactive later on. I'm going to run through some slides here in a couple of minutes. I assume this thing, I don't know how this works. Upside down. Oh, I've got it this way. We'll figure it out here in a minute. Thank you for having me. And I know you have been treated to the wisdom of some of my colleagues. Go that way? All right. Bruce Westerman, French Hill, Rick Crawford, and I don't know what much more that I can add to that conversation. I'm sure you have been enlightened and completely overwhelmed by that by that collection of wisdom and experience that comes to you from Capitol Hill. Let me say this at the very outset. And I was talking to a couple of members here in the back. You should be very proud of your Arkansas congressional delegation. And I don't just say that to patronize my colleagues. Rick and I came together in that big class of 2010. French and Bruce came in the last class. And in each, myself excluded and set aside for a minute, but in each case, you know, Rick is one of the senior members on Ag, one of the senior members on Transportation and Infrastructure. I mean, he's climbing the ropes of seniority. And seniority is very important in Washington, D.C. If you're going to get anything done legislatively, if you're going to advocate for policy and see that idea germinate and make it across the finish line, then you're going to have to be on relevant committees and you're going to have to develop seniority. You're going to have to control a gavel. And in Rick's case, he began on T&I and Ag, and he has stayed there, and in 3 terms, he has climbed the ranks where he's among the senior members. Now, that says a lot about Congress and how it's changed over the last 3 terms. And Bruce, as you know, natural resources and science and now budget, and I'm on the budget committee with Bruce, tremendous intellect and going to go a long way in Congress, going to be there a long time. The way that district is drawn and the overwhelming popularity that Bruce has and the credibility he brings to the table suggests to me that it won't be long before we're saying the same things about Bruce that I just said about Rick, about climbing the ranks of seniority and truly making a difference in Washington. I know that he's happy on those committees. I believe in my mind that we also need to be thinking of Bruce in terms of where he goes next in committees, and I foresee maybe down the road a spot on the Energy and Commerce Committee for him. It's in his wheelhouse. It's something he's got a lot of credibility in, and it is one of the preeminent committees of Congress, and sure would like to see Bruce matriculate to the Energy and Commerce Committee someday. Not that the others aren't important, it's just that that would really give us, Arkansas, give us a really nice position to hold on a very significant, one of the A committees in Congress. And then let me finally say this about French. As a member of the steering committee in the House of Representatives on our side, I and about 35 of my colleagues decide where these members go. That's our charter as a steering committee member. And I knew when French came to town that he was going to offer some things that would make himself suited for either Ways and Means or Financial Services, and we had long talks about that, and as it turned out, he went the Financial Services route, and there were several vacancies in that last class. French would, if he were telling this story, he'd probably color it up like I did when it was happening, but French got the very last slot from his class on the Financial Services Committee. So he's on the committee. He's no longer the most junior member of that committee because there's been a newcomer since then, but I'm tickled that we have somebody with his depth of knowledge in financial matters sitting on the Financial Services Committee as French Hill. And so you should be proud of that. And let me just say again what I just said. You should be proud of your delegation. They are doing remarkable work. As for me, yeah, thank you. Now, as for me, I came to Congress in 2011. I asked for and got a seat on an extremely powerful committee, that being Appropriations, and I have been there ever since. And fingers crossed, if I don't jinx myself, there is an outside shot that if there were to be a vacancy in the subcommittee chairmanships, and there are 12, on that committee in the next Congress, that I will be standing next in line. Well, I say that, standing shoulder to shoulder with another colleague of mine, Kevin Yoder from Kansas. The two of us are next in seniority, and one of us is going to be treated with a gavel as a subcommittee chairman. Now, that may not seem like a lot to you, and they don't call subcommittee chairman on appropriations cardinals for nothing. It is an extremely influential position when you can write one of the 12 discretionary appropriations bills in the House of Representatives. That says something. And so, you know, if we don't mess things up, we got a shot at being the next cardinal on appropriations, and I would be very honored and privileged to have such a position. I'm going to take just a few minutes, and I'm going to go through some slides, and I certainly want to open up for Q&A. And oh, by the way, thanks for getting me on a little early. That means I get out a little early, and I got a dinner tonight down here, and to look forward to my time in Little Rock. If I were going to be the only person standing before you as a member of Congress, I'd spend a lot more time on the subjects of ag policy that relates to you, but I know you've been inundated with that, and you guys study it, and you're immersed in that condition all of the time. What I've thrown up is just an idea, top-line items of what Steve Womack believes we, the federal government, owe those engaged in production agriculture. And you can see them up here. That in trade policy, I've got at the very top, as you know, we've got an ongoing trade debate that's happening in the Congress now, and maybe by the end of the year we could see some movement on the TPP that's being debated. Just so you'll know, en route here today, I had a telephone conversation with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady, out of the Woodlands, Texas. And Kevin and I had a long talk about TPP, and I wanted to get his perspective as to where it is. And let me just tell you what the bottom line to the TPP debate is as we speak. And that is that Kevin is going to allow the support for TPP, either current or future, drive the agenda. Let me say it again. For those interested in knowing when we're going to see TPP on the floor, it will be a decision made by the developing support for the program. As you know, we've got issues on the other side of the aisle from where I sit on TPP. There are some tweaks that need to be made to kind of shore up the support, and there are some subject areas that the trade representative is going to have to kind of better define and as I say, tweak just a little bit. They deal primarily with issues like tobacco, biogenics and biometrics, and then there are and pharmaceuticals, and there are there's some labor stuff inside the negotiations that need to be tweaked, and perhaps a few others. But I can just assure you that at such a time that the votes are there to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, you will see that. And it's got to be done in such a way that we don't lose support, that we shore up the support for it. So I think trade policy is something that our government owes the ag community. Number two I've got there is risk management. Some would make that number one. We've got to help agriculture figure out how to protect itself against a lot of different factors, some of which the economy will drive and others that are God-driven. But I think some kind of risk management structure is very important. Reg relief, that third one, man, it didn't make any difference what audience I'm talking to anymore. You could be a group of educators. You could be a group of bankers. You could be a group of mayors. You could be a group of anybody in our country today, and I will tell you that the single greatest concern that is voiced to me as a member of Congress is you got to do something about the hyper-regulatory burdens that are coming down on all forms of society. And it's not reserved to any one specific group, although some feel like they're hit harder than others. But I will tell you, I have never in my life witnessed a situation like we find ourselves in today, where we've got a bureaucracy that is too big and going the extra mile to try to justify their very existence. Now, I'm an Article I guy. I believe that we ought to be able to pull these folks in check, whether it's EPA or Department of Labor or any of the other three-letter agencies that kind of roam Washington. But we struggle with our Article I powers for the simple reason that we do have divided government. And we do have things called the rules of the Senate, the 60-vote threshold on filibuster, and the inability to sometimes, most of the time, the inability to get people from the other side of the aisle to agree with us, and even then, holding the 54 that we keep in the Senate in check because, as you know, there's some political divisions even among some of the majority makers on our side in the United States Senate. So trying to figure out how we hit the sweet spot in there on holding the bureaucracy accountable has proven elusive to the Congress. And so reg relief to me is critical. When I talk to my job creators, I want you to hear me say this. It is no longer tax policy or shortages of labor or the skills gap. It's reg relief. I have a constituent in my district, a household name heating and air commercial manufacturer. A lot of jobs. And when they say to me that their research and development budget is 80% the cost of compliance, that speaks volumes to me as a member. 80% of their investment in R&D is trying to keep the bureaucracy in check in Washington. This same company has product designs, new technology ready to introduce to the market, but for about 25 rulemaking procedures going on within the Department of Energy as I speak. They can't bring these products to the market because of the uncertainty created by what the regulatory burdens are going to do to their profitability. That's not the America that I know. And we've got to fix reg relief. And then the last two, access to capital, speaks for itself. We've got to find a way to be able to reintroduce to America what it's like to go to the bank and get the loan and develop the relationships. And we've got a lot of bureaucracy standing in our way today, and access to capital has become problematical. And of course, man, I'm not the guy that needs to tell you about energy policy. You guys see it every day. We don't have a truly all-of-the-above energy policy. We've got an all but one energy policy, and we've got to fix that. So those are the things that Steve Womack believes that your federal government owes you, and I am pleased to see the Farm Bureau advocating for a lot of these issues in Washington when they come. By the way, my dad, who is a well-known broadcaster and does a lot of farm programming in Northwest Arkansas, reminded me as I was driving down here today, I was talking to him. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go talk to the Farm Bureau." He said, "Well, you be sure and you tell those people that Benton County, Arkansas has one of the outstanding Farm Bureau agencies in all of Arkansas." So I don't mean to exclude the rest of you, but I know there's one or two of you from Benton County in here today, and I want you to know Kermit thinks very highly of you. And so when you talk to him, tell him I made good on that promise. Now I want to have a sober conversation with you. We can do all those things we just talked about. And if we don't fix this, it doesn't make any difference. And I'm going to walk you through a handful of slides here. Every chance I get with adult audiences, I try to talk about these things. And fortunately, we're on the first floor of the embassy suites here, so if you jump out a window, you're not going to hurt yourself. But this is the piece of policy that is not being addressed by the candidates seeking your vote for president, and it should be. It's not the size of a man's hands, it's the size of our deficits and our debt. So I want to, if you'll take this a little stroll with me, I want to help educate you, and maybe through your network of friends and associates, you can help us articulate this story, because this has to be fixed. Time is getting away from us. That's the pie of federal spending. And you can see that in that blue, what we call mandatory spending, a lot of people, it's just a word to them, but mandatory means by law. That means it doesn't make any difference what I do in Washington. It doesn't make any difference what you do back in Arkansas. Unless and until the law changes, this money gets spent. And there's some big programs in here. The piece in red is basically what you spend, what we spend on the discretionary side. So I call that discretionary spending, and that's the piece that the Appropriations Committee of the U.S. House and the Senate are in charge of, that little over $1 trillion in spending. So there's discretionary, that 1.2 trillion broken down, and you can see the big piece of it's green, defense. That's constitutional. Provide for the common defense. Provide for the common defense. And remember, we've got a proliferating threat, in case anybody hadn't paid attention. ISIS being one of those, but it pales in comparison to some of the other threats looming. Shall I name them? Russia, China, Iran. Commander of Pacific Command, Harry Harris, sitting on the couch in my office the other day. And I said, Admiral, what keeps you up at night? And without hesitation, he said, North Korea. This is not the time for us to be whittling national defense. We've got major issues facing us, and there are a lot of concerns out there about whether your country can actually go defend our nation and her interests in other parts of the land based on the force structure and the end strength that we see today. And you can see all the others, but it's a defense-dominated discretionary budget. There's that mandatory side. Remember, this is by law. This is under current law. If nothing changes, then this is exactly what happens to 2/3 of the federal budget. Now remember, to change this, you have to change the law. And changing the law is hard. It's just as hard probably as hitting the lottery. I have another slide, I won't show it to you today, that kind of compares changing the law to the lottery. 5 white ping pong balls and a power ball. File a bill, get it through committee, get it through the House, get it through the Senate, get it through a conference committee, and then the power ball. Get it signed by the president. It's tough. So we're kind of stuck with this until somebody advocates for a change. And there's a lot of things being floated around out there, but nobody's really signing up for it yet. Elevating ages, means testing, and so on. But you can see that Social Security and Medicare, in fact, when you add Medicaid, all the health care spending, you can see that's about 2/3 of the pie. So look at this slide for a minute, ponder it, because what you will see on the left, back in 1965, that white area between the EKG line and the programs at the bottom was 2/3 of spending. Now look at what's happened over time. In fact, I think this will graphically show you. That green, as it moved to the right, got a lot thinner. And so if you kind of trace this out to about 2030, that used to sound like a long time away. But if you move this arrow out to about 2030, you can see there will be no more money left for discretionary spending. No money to pay our troops. No money to offset the difference in the Highway Trust Fund for bridges and highways, and no money for education, and no money for the programs of vital interest to you. It'll all be consumed by that which is prescribed by law. And you can see what they are: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, net interest on the debt. The EKG number, that red line, jagged line that levels out over time, has always been about 18% of the economy, give or take. Federal spending is north of that. And the more we keep federal spending, and that's both mandatory and discretionary, the longer we keep it at 23, 24% of GDP, you don't have to be really good in math to figure out that you're going to run out of money. And this slide troubles me because, like I said, 2030 didn't seem like it was too close back at the turn of the millennium. That was 30 years away. And now here we are in 2016. Y2K is a distant memory to us. And less than a generation from now, we're going to run out of money. We're going to run out of money. There's why. And a lot of you are in this gray area in the middle. I am. I make no apologies for that. It's just a fact that the baby boomers, and I like to do this with my audiences, I ask them, I say, how much do you know about Medicare? Seniors, they know a lot about it. And I said, well, what happened today with Medicare that significantly increased the cost to our government? And boy, they're clueless. And I say, here's what happened. 11,000 people aged into the program today. And then something's going to happen tomorrow with Medicare that's going to complicate matters for us all. And now by the time you say that, now they're getting it. Another 11,000 people are going to age into that program. My friends, in the next 20 years, there are going to be 80 million people in this program. And so if you don't solve for the increasing costs of Medicare, the program will not be viable mathematically or actuarially, and something needs to be done. It's not being talked about in the debates. It'll level off eventually, but it's going bust. So if you want to know true dollars, then let's just look at a window here of about 20 years. So let's go back to 2006, and you can see how much each one of those programs cost the federal treasury. Medicare, in the red, $374 billion. And this year, nearly $700 billion. And in 2026, in the next 10 years, unless something changes by law, it'll be a $1.3 trillion program. Let's put that in perspective. Medicare by itself will be bigger than the entire discretionary budget of the United States. Medicaid, similar growth projections. Social Security is the biggest in the blue there. $500 billion in 2006, 3 times that in the 10-year window. And the net interest on the debt, my, oh my. Now, folks, let me tell you what that is. For those of you that have credit cards, that's minimum payment due. That's just to pay the interest. That's not to reduce the debt. That's just simply to pay the interest. And the interest on the national debt, if we don't solve for the problem in the 10-year window, is going to be approaching $1 trillion a year by itself. So the president sends his budget to Capitol Hill. I can't find anybody on either side of the aisle willing to introduce it in the House of Representatives. It's dead on arrival. But CBO said it would project that growth will be no better than sluggish, about 2.1% growth in the 10-year window. That deficits will climb $9.4 trillion. Over the next 10 years, it'll be 4% increase in revenue, 5+ increase in spending. The total debt today, when I came in, $19.2 trillion. The total debt in 2026, $30 trillion. Federal health care spending, that's Medicaid, Medicare together, will exceed Social Security. And Part A, hospital insurance of Medicare, will be insolvent. 2030. I got a 2-year-old grandson. That happens before he can vote. That's just around the corner. So you can see the net interest cost, according to the president's budget, expected to increase sharply over time. And then there you can see in the red the president's budget, and you can see in the blue what the House alternative budget would do if we can get it on the floor and get it passed. And our budget will balance by 2026. Yeah, we'll add a lot more to the debt over time, but at least we'll get to reasonable balance by 2026 and start creating a surplus. I hope it's not too late. And then I wanted to graphically portray for you, just so you get it, the bar in red, that's net interest on the debt and how it relates to other programs that your tax dollars fund. So as you can see, Social Security is the big one at the top, Medicare number 2. Net interest on the debt in the 10-year window under current law becomes the 3rd largest program by itself in the federal budget. I hope by now that I have made a good case for each of you to start leaning forward on this subject. It's going to be unpleasant. When politicians like me have to step up to the plate and advocate for changes that will bend these curves in a better direction for the future of our country, there is going to be a backlash from a lot of people that think, don't do it on my back. Let somebody else pay for it. We're at the stage right now where we're all going to pay for it. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and advocate that we raise anybody's taxes. That should always be a last resort. I am advocating that we do need to get our arms around the mandatory spending of this country, or it's going to break us as a nation. It will break the bank. No mathematician, no actuarial expert can make any case at all for current law. It will not work. And you know, here's the other part about it. This is the moral argument. This is the greatest example of generational theft in the history of our country. We are stealing from Liam and Caden. Those are my 2 grandkids. Yours have names as well. Plus, we owe it to these 2 young ladies in the back. I picked them out because they do look pretty young to me. Thank you. We owe it to them to let them know what the social safety net that's going to be applicable to their lives is going to look like, so that they can start planning their lives around it. The social safety net program that we know today will not be there for their generation. And I put down there education and transportation just so you can see what piddly amounts we spend on these vital programs compared to what we're spending on these others. And then you've all said it, I've said it, boy, if we can just cut waste, fraud, and abuse, if we could just eliminate all the foreign aid in the world, if we can do all these things, we can balance the books. Look at the deficit at the bottom. It's over $500 billion. And these are liberal amounts that I've applied to waste, fraud, and abuse and foreign aid. If you add those two up, you're less than $200 billion. Houston, we still have a problem. Now, that's not to say we don't go after these. We continue to hold foreign aid accountable. We continue to go after waste, fraud, and abuse. But I will tell you, without structural changes in those programs, the country will not be able to withstand the burden. So here's Congress's to-do list. This looks pretty easy, but it's difficult. First of all, pass a budget. To me, that's fundamental to Congress. That's what we should be doing. Next to national security, I think the fiscal affairs of our country is our single biggest requirement. I know as a mayor, my fiduciary responsibility to the city that I led was probably my single greatest objective every year. So passing a budget is not all that easy. Let me tell you what we're fighting over right now. I don't know if Bruce is still here. He may have already left. He's on the committee with me. We marked up our budget in committee, so we've passed it in committee. It's ready to go to the floor of the House. And we're fighting. We're fighting right now. It's a $1.07 trillion budget. We're fighting over $3 billion. And that $3 billion comes out of national security. That's what we're fighting over. Because the argument is we shouldn't spend $1.07 trillion. We should really spend $1.04 trillion. Now, you guys that are sharp in math figured out real quickly, that's not 3, that's 30. But here's the problem. There aren't any votes for $1.04 trillion, not enough. And we don't have enough for $1.07 trillion. So if you don't have votes for either one of those and you run out of options, you automatically revert to a continuing resolution at what number? $1.067 trillion. That's what the number will be. So we're fighting, literally, we're fighting. We're dividing our conference, and we're holding our government hostage over $3 billion. That's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but in the overall scheme of things, it's not a lot of money when compared to the fact that the discretionary budget's really $1.07 trillion. $3 billion, that's what we're fighting over. Pass appropriations bills and a spending bill in regular order. I'm a regular order guy. This is the way the framers designed this process to work. Pass a budget, mark your appropriations bill, stay within the budget, and then give oversight and accountability, see that it's spent correctly, and then do it again the next year. We haven't passed appropriations bills through regular order since I've been in Congress. It is the new normal. What scares me is that most people in Congress now don't know what regular order looks like. They've never seen it. Consider the TPP. We've got to get that on the floor. Like I say, support will drive it. Pass the tax extenders before they expire in December. Pass the Defense Authorization Act. That's critical to our men and women in uniform. And then let's get away from this notion of kicking the can down the road on these reauthorizations. On this case, FAA, we've kicked that one to March, and we're going to come back and have to revisit the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization. I mean, these seem like they should be pretty easy to do, but elusive right now in the House of Representatives. And I won't even talk about the Senate. I'll let Tom and John do that. There is a movement afoot to tie our budget to the fact that we are continuing to fund non-authorized programs. Now, most people, just casually thinking, would say, well, if it's not authorized, it shouldn't be funded. I mean, that would be real easy for me to opine, except when I know that there are programs out there that haven't been reauthorized that you and I both know we need, and I've listed some of them. So when that subject comes up and the talking heads start saying, hey, you ought to support the McClintock Amendment that says no funding for any program out there that hasn't been reauthorized. First of all, the authorizing committees are not doing their jobs by reauthorizing these programs, but that does not give us rise to be able to say we shouldn't fund them. Look at those. I mean, my goodness gracious, the FBI is one of those organizations. Nobody's going to advocate zeroing out the FBI or level funding the FBI, not in today's threat environment. So just so you know, unauthorized federal programs still get funded by the appropriators, and for good reason. So if you want to write a mean letter to me, go ahead. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just one guy. I'm just one guy who used to be a mayor, who had to balance his books every day, who does it at home, pays his bills. I'm just one guy. I'm just like you. Put my britches on one leg at a time. And I know I'm pretty simple at times, but even I can understand that it's not that we don't tax you enough. It's that our federal government is spending way too much money, and we've got to bring it in check. So thanks for giving me an opportunity to take kind of a sobering view of where we are as a nation from the domestic perspective. And if that's not enough to depress you, I could go into another presentation on the proliferation of the threat and help you understand why we shouldn't be cutting national defense, but I'm going to leave that to another session. So, Zach, do we have just a few minutes? Okay, I want to set aside a couple of minutes so that if any of you would like to throw a question at me or a comment. I'm a big boy, thick skin, broad shoulder, well, not so broad, but I think I can handle it. And anybody can ask except Tom Jones. I don't want Tom Jones asking any questions, because Tom and I went to college together, and he's liable to say something that will embarrass me, which will force me to say something that will even more embarrass him. So I'm kidding. Anybody, please. Tom, you can if you want. Anybody.
Well, first of all, why all this fighting? You're all decent men and women.
Most of us.
You know how to behave. You got manners. You're courteous to most people. So why are we so ugly? And why do we continue to be so ugly to each other in our Congress, in our all that government business?
Great question, and thank you for it. First of all, it's not as ugly as the media would like for you to believe. There's a lot of really nice bipartisan stuff going on. You know, I traveled a week ago up to the Arctic polar ice cap. Senator Murphy from Connecticut, Congressman Cooper from Tennessee, Congressman Kilmer from Washington. I mean, these are Democrats on the same plane with me. Great conversations. Yeah, we differ politically. We're all trying to get maybe to the same thing, but we've got different ways of getting there. But it's not quite as ugly. But that doesn't mean that it still doesn't have its unpleasantries. And let me tell you what my general thinking of it is. And I think this has happened in part over two primary inertias. One of them is the long-term effects of the decennial census and the corresponding redesignation of boundaries, redistricting as we call it. You saw this in Arkansas in 2010, 11 really, that over time, more and more of our congressional districts have become safe. In other words, they have become gerrymandered, if you will, so that only one party can actually compete for that particular prize, which means that the general election is no longer the real issue. And so to have a good discussion about policy, about whether we should have bigger government or less government, higher taxes or lower taxes, more regulation, less regulation, that debate happens typically in a general election framework. And I'm hoping that when we get to the presidential election that we will see more of that policy discussion, the competition for ideas happen. But when you have so many of your congressional districts that the general election is not important, that means that you can have a single, solitary debate over who is the most conservative on our side and who is the most liberal on the other side. And so it's not about a competition for ideas, it's a competition to see who can out-party the other one. And there's smaller turnouts, so a smaller group of Americans actually decide. Now, Arkansas 3 is one of those districts. Now, it hasn't been drawn that way. It's just by its very nature. Since the mid-1960s, it's just been a very conservative Republican stronghold. And until I came to Congress, it was the only seat of the 6-member delegation that was Republican. So now Arkansas 4 has been redrawn. It's a little more conservative. It's a much more conservative district. The 1st and the 2nd drawn more conservatively. And then the gradual conservative movement in Arkansas makes each one of those kind of, November proof. I mean, French has got a Democrat opponent, but Rick doesn't, Bruce doesn't, I don't. There's not a two-party mechanism anymore, so we're not talking about ideas. So back to your question, why is it ugly? Because most members in these districts, these safe districts, are more concerned about getting a primary opponent than they are about advocating for the right policy. We say they belong to the vote no, hope yes caucus. Now, I've never been accused of that. And I do have parts of my base that come down on me a lot. The omnibus bill, Ex-Im Bank, my argument about e-fairness on online shopping and the devastating impact it's having on our cities and our counties and our state. I get hammered about that stuff by my base. But I'm going to tell you this, I have 2 real litmus tests for my votes. And here they are, just so you know. The first one is, if my position on the issue is the prevailing position, in other words, if I vote yes and the yeses prevail, can I defend it? And the second litmus test is when I put my head down on my pillow at night, can I sleep well with that vote? Or was it influenced by something other than doing the right thing? And I got to tell you, I've been witness to a lot of members of Congress that reserve their vote to appease the vote counters, the outside groups who are scoring those votes. And so my scorecard probably is not going to be as sterling with a Heritage Action or Americans for Prosperity or the Club for Growth or the Americans for Tax Reform and on and on and on and on and on. And I don't check with those people before I vote. Some people do, because they know that if they get crossways with them, there'll be a boatload of dark money dropped in their next race, and they'll have to defend their positions, and it may be too late. That part of politics has to change, but it's likely not going to change until the electorate demands that it change. So that was the first thing, the redistricting. The second piece of it, social media. Social media. Think about this. In the few minutes that I've been with you today, I could have articulated a position on a subject that could have been controversial. And it might have been something about a new policy. It might have been Steve Womack just advocated that we raise everybody's taxes, and all it takes is one tweet from this very room, and I could be damaged, if not destroyed, politically. So social media, redistricting, I think, gets credit for a lot of that. And I know I'm way over time, and I'm on your time. I just want you to know how proud I am of the Farm Bureau. Oh, do we have one more? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I thought I was about to get the hook over here.
Previously, we had a comment made that the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a big loser for rice. Can you explain that?
Well, I'm not an expert on it. I have heard from my rice people. I think, and there are rice people sitting in this room that are much more qualified to answer that. I have heard that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not necessarily a win-win-win for rice, as it would be for maybe some of the protein suppliers of our state. So again, as Kevin Brady said, it will be the support and the tweaks that are made of the TPP that will drive whether or not it's acceptable. And at the end of the day, whether it is good or bad for agriculture in Arkansas will eventually drive the support that you will get or not get from the 4-member delegation of the House. And if there's somebody else in the audience that has a better response on exactly the provisions as it concerns rice, I don't have a lot of rice in my district. In fact, I'm not sure I have any rice in my district, but I do know my wife is from Arkansas County. She's old DeWitt Dragon, so I do know that rice is very important and fundamental to the economy of our state. And I got rice in my office. So with that said, okay, now I'm going to leave you. There is probably not an organization in Arkansas more representative of its people, the collective people of our state, than the people gathered right here in this room. You got your finger on the pulse. You're dealing a lot with rural Arkansas. And rural America, I've been reminded over and over again, is part of our genius. The things that we do today have an inextricable link to the heritage of our country in our state. In our state, we have been an agricultural economy for a long, long time, even in Benton and Washington County, where most people who have moved in there to do business with Walmart or Tyson or Hunt would probably disclaim the effects and the impact and the influence of production agriculture in the economy, except they can't argue with the fact that the 2 top farm income producing counties in the state of Arkansas are Benton and Washington County. So what I'm saying is that when I stand before a group like this, I do so with great reverence and great respect and value for the opinions that you have. And so when you see these addresses up there and these phone contacts, whether you're a member of the 3rd District or not, I sure hope you'll keep them in mind and let me know how you feel when you feel a certain way on a lot of these issues facing our country. God bless you. God bless America. Thanks for having me today.
Congressman, we want to say thank you for coming today. Appreciate your speak and look forward to working with you in the future.
Joe. Thank you.
Thank you.